Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi Shabbos Daf Tzadik Beis. We're on Tzadik Aleph Amud Beis. 5 lines from the bottom. We're in the middle about machlokes between Chizkiah and Rav Yochanan in the case where a person carries out a kli full of mustard seeds. Now, the kli is partially in Shus Rabban and partially in Shus HaYachid. According to Chizkiah, we ignore the fact that the kli is partially inside. We focus on the content of the kli. And if the mustard seeds, which are found on the outside portion of the kli, are entirely Shus HaRabim, that is considered to be Shus HaRabim. According to Rav Yochanan, it is the kli, it is the container that determines the status and location of its content. And therefore, in this case, since the kli is still partially inside, that determines the status and location of the content, and we view the entire content, all the mustard seeds, as though they're still in Shus HaYachid, and there was no Ma'aseh Veitzah done here. Continues the Gemara, we're going to ask a kasha, Rav Yochanan, who maintains that Eged Kli, the fact that the Kli is still bound up, is still tied up within, it's still partially inside, Shmei Eged, that is considered to be bound up even regarding its content. Says the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom. Masiv Rav Bevi Barabai. The Brisa says that Goinev Kis B'Shabbos Chayev. So, just give a small introduction here. There's a halacha of Kimlei B'Deravim Minei. If a person would commit 2 isurim through one act, through one ma'aseh, he's only liable on the more stringent einish, the more stringent punishment. For instance, if he did a ma'aseh geneva with a malacha on Shabbos simultaneously, he is pater for the chiyuv mammon, for the financial monetary liability. He's only responsible for the chiyuv misa of Shabbos, the capital punishment liability. So this is the halacha of Kimlei B'Derabim Minei. If 2 isurim happen simultaneously, we give him the einish, which is more stringent. Says the Brisa, Hagoinev Kis B'Shabbos. If one steals a pouch, a money pouch on Shabbos, so he does 2 isurim. Number 1, isur gneva stealing. Number 2, when he carries it out, Shus HaRabim, he did a melacha veitzah. Says the Brisa, Chayav. He will be chayav to pay back the money. He's liable even for the dinim mammonis, for the monetary liability here. Why? Shekvar is chayav b'gneva, because he became liable for the gneva. Koidem sheyavod de'isur Shabbos, because when he lifted this pouch off the ground, he did a ma'aseh, a kinyan of hagbah. He acquired possession of the pouch by lifting it even when he was still standing in the homeowner's property. So at that point, he did the isur gneva, and he's chayav for that. Later on, when he carries it out, that is when the melacha veitzah takes place. That's only after the chiyuv gneva. So in this case, surely he is liable on both accounts, on the isur Shabbos and the isur gneva. However, if he chose to be kainah, to acquire possession by dragging the pouch outside Shus HaRabim, so he didn't lift it off the ground, he didn't do a kinyan of hagbah, rather he opted for the kinyan meshicha. In this case, as the Brisa pater, he is pater because both things happen at the same moment. As soon as it reaches Shus HaRabim, he drags it out of Shus HaRabim. At that point, 2 things happen. There's a melacha veitzah and the isur and the kinyan of gneva. Sharei, since isur of gneva, the isur Shabbos, bo'in ke'echad, to both happening simultaneously. Therefore, he's pater on the gneva, since he incurs liability on the more stringent punishment, the capital punishment, the chiyuv misa, due to the isur of melacha veitzah on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, let's analyze. Now, if you maintain that Eged Kli, Shmei Eged, that the fact that the Kli is partially bound inside, that is considered to be bound even regarding its content, says the Gemara, Kadam le'isur gneva l'isur Shabbos. In this case, when he drags the pouch outside, as soon as part of the kiss, part of the pouch, is found in Shus HaRabim, at that point, he has done isur gneva. He has been kainah, the kinyan gneva. Why? Because since he has access to the money, the coins which are already on the outside portion of this kiss, already sitting in Shus HaRabim, even though the actual kiss, the pouch, is still partially bound up within, it's still partially in Shus HaYachid. So there's no melacha veitzah, according to Rav Yochanan. But when it comes to gneva, he committed gneva because he has full access to those coins which are on the outside part of this kiss, which are found actually in Shus HaRabim itself. Says the Gemara, if so, in this case, Kadam le Issa Geneva, Issa Shabbos. Issa Geneva precedes Issa Shabbos, which only takes place later, when the pouch is entirely brought out. Says the Gemara, Ida Afka derech piv. So if he's dragging it out by way of its mouth first, opening first, Hachinami, surely you're right, certainly in this case, you're making a point that since he drags out the he's partially dragging it out, part of the kli, part of the kiss is already outside, and the coins which are on the outside part of this kiss, which are inshus rab, are fully accessible to him. He can simply open up the piv, the opening, the mouth of this pouch, and access those coins. He has committed Isser Geneva, he was Koine B'Kinyani Geneva, and therefore Geneva comes first. Hachav my skin, and how we're speaking about. The Afke Derech Shulav, he dragged it out bottom first. So he drags out the bottom of the pouch first. Therefore, even when the coins are actually found in Rishus Rabbin physically, since he doesn't have access to them until he actually drags out the entire pouch, and then could open the mouth and reach the coins, therefore he has not done Geneva until he actually carries out the entire pouch, in which case both Yisurim, Geneva and Shabbos, will be happening simultaneously. Says the Gemara, but even when he carries it out bottom first, there are the seams, meaning the boy mafkele, he can simply rip open one of those seams, v'shakal, and take out the coins. So even when it's bottom first, he has full access to those coins by simply opening up the seams of this pouch, thereby giving him full access and possession of those coins, and therefore he's doing a ma'aseh geneva prior to the malach of eitzot, which only takes place later when the entire pouch is found outside. The boy mafkele v'shakal, says the ben nascha. We're speaking about long sticks of for instance, of silver. Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi on top, the first line, benascha shein chatichas aruchos, long pieces, for instance, of silver. The kolzman shemektsasam b'fnim leikana. Now, when we speak about long sticks, certainly there's no acquisition until the entire stick is completely outside. So even when, in terms of kinyanik zela of Issa Geneva, has not done anything. He has not acquired possession, because if these long sticks are still partially inside the homeowner's property, he has not done any Issa Geneva here, because it's still within the property of the Balabais. He has not really acquired possession of it. So in this case, certainly, the only way the Issa Geneva will happen is if the entire stick is outside. Therefore, we understand very well, the Halach and the Braisa, that when the entire pouch is outside, at that point, the Geneva and Shabbos happen together simultaneously, and therefore, there's no liability on the Geneva, because he is given the most stringent punishment on account of Isser Shabbos. Says for 1 second, V'kivan the Ikan Shnatzen, since we still have these drawstrings, which are attached to they're near the mouth of the pouch. So since we have these shantzen, mapikli apume, perhaps he's going to drag the pouch. Let's say it's bottom first. So he drags it and drags it until he gets to the pum, to the opening of the pouch. At that point, while the drawstrings are still in the Rishus HaYachid, he already has full access to the nascha, to the long sticks, because he opens the opening of the pouch and can access the money and this precious metal. But these strings are still in Rishus HaYachid. There's no Yitzhak Shabbos, because the kli is still partially inside. So here as well, says the Gemara, Geneva will come first. Once again, the kiv and the ikashnatz, since we have those shnatz and those drawstrings, mapikli apume, he will drag the pouch until the opening is found outside of Rishus Rabbin. Vishari, and open the opening. Vishakil, and he can remove the content. Vishnatzen agidim megavoy, but the drawstring is still bound within, meaning it's still lagging behind. There's still Rishus HaYachid megavoy. And in that case, the kli, since it's not fully outside, there's no Yitzhak Shabbos, because eged kli, the fact that the kli is still bound partially within, that affects the malach of Shabbos. And in this case as well, the Isser Geneva will come first. So why does the Brisa tell us that by dragging the pouch, he is pater? Why is he pater? Geneva will come before Shabbos. Says about the Lekish Natzim, we're speaking about there are no drawstrings. So, in which case, when he drags the entire pouch outside until its mouth, everything has come along, there's nothing remaining behind. And Shabbos and Geneva happen simultaneously, and therefore he's pater. Or, if you prefer, we will say the Islay. Certainly this pouch has these drawstrings, but the strings are wrapped on the pouch itself, and they don't lag behind, they don't drag behind. So once we remove the entire pouch from the Shesayach, the drawstrings has come along, and therefore there's nothing left behind, there's no Eged Kli. And therefore Shabbos and Geneva both happen at the same time, simultaneously, and therefore he's pater on Geneva, since the most stringent einish of Shabbos will be applied to him. So in summary, when one is goinev a kiss b'Shabbos, so it depends what type of kinyan he decides to use. If he opts for the kinyan hakbar by lifting it off the ground, he is chayiv on Geneva because the chayiv Geneva takes place in the Rosh Hashanah prior to the Yitzah of Shabbos. What if he decides to use kinyan meshich? He drags the pouch and wishes to acquire possession in that manner. He is pater because the kinyan of Geneva, the Isser of Geneva, will take place simultaneous with the Isser of Melachas HaVitzah Shabbos. Now we have two ways of interpreting this halacha. According to Chizkiah, who chooses to focus on the content of the pouch, then this halacha will be speaking about a case where the pouch is full of coins. Now the coins, which are actually found on the outer portion of this pouch, which are sitting in Shesarabim, this halacha pertains to those coins. He's kind of those coins. He does the Melach HaVitzah on those coins, even though the pouch is still partially inside. So since the Geneva and the Yitzah of Shabbos take place simultaneously on those coins, he is pater because we apply the most stringent einish, which is for Shabbos, and therefore he is exempt from the monetary liability from the Chiv of Geneva. According to Rav Yochanan, on the other hand, we're speaking about a pouch which contains nascha, these long sticks, and it's only when he actually pulls out the entire pouch into Shesarabim that this halacha will be applicable. So at that point, both things happen at once: the Chiv Geneva and the Chiv Shabbos, and therefore he's pater on the Geneva and he's chayav on the Shabbos. Continues the Gemara. Rava also interpreted our Mishnah the same way Chizkiah did. The Mishnah tells us that if he's carrying out the basket which contains produce, contains peris, he's only chayiv until he is moitzi kol hakupa, until he actually carries out the entire basket. Says Rava, lo yishanu. This term, this halacha, only pertains ella bekupa malei kishun edloim, only a container which is full of kishun, cucumbers with loim and gourds, melons. In which case, the part of the produce, part of the item of this cucumber is still inside, unless he carries out the entire basket, and therefore he's pater until he carries out the entire kupa. Avo malei chardal. But if this basket contains mustard seeds, chayav, he is chayav even on account of carrying out a part of the basket, because we focus on the content of the basket. So since this particular mustard seed is sitting on the outside, in Rosh Hashanah, he is chayiv, regardless of the fact that the kupa, the basket, is still partially inside. Alma kasavar, apparently he holds, eged kli, the fact that the kli is still bound up inside, lo yishmei eged, and doesn't affect the content. Abaye Amar, no, we focus on the kli, on the container. In accordance to Rav Yochanan's shita, afilu milei chardal pater, even if it's full of mustard seeds, he's pater until the entire basket is outside. Alma kasavar, apparently Abaye holds, eged kli, shmei eged, we focus on the kli and the fact that the kli is still bound up, it's still partially in shesayachid, that affects the content, affects the status, and determines the location of the content found herein. Continues the Gemara. Come Abaye, b'shitzei de Rava. Abaye adopted the view of Rava, and he changed his opinion. He decided to focus on the content instead. Come Rava, b'shitzei de Abaye. Rava as well switched, and he adopted the view of Abaye, who meant to focus on the kli, on the container. Says the Gemara, now we have a contradiction. V'rami de Abaye ad Abaye, v'rami de Rava de Rava. We have a contradiction from Abaye here to Abaye elsewhere, and the same thing regarding Rava. The Itmar, because we learned hamoitzi peris shesarabim, if one carries out peris into shesarabim, so he's standing in shesayachid, but he carries out shesarabim. Abaye Omar biyad chayev. If he carries it in his hand, meaning He's still standing Rishus HaYachid, but he reaches out with something in his hand in the Rishus HaYachid. He is chayiv, because the fact that his guf, his body, is still inside, that's irrelevant. We view the hand as an independent entity, and therefore it's considered as though it landed in Rishus Rabim, as if the Paris landed in Rishus Rabim, he's chayiv. Bikli potter. But if he carries it out using a kli, and the kli is still partially inside, he is potter, because the fact that the kli is bound up within, eged kli shmei eged, we need the entire kli to be outside. V'rav amar, just the opposite, biyad potter. If he's standing inside and extends his hand into Rishus Rabim, he's potter, because the hand is not an independent entity. It's fully connected and related to his body, which is still inside. Bikli chayev. But if he should do so using a kli, so if he carries a kli outside and the kli is still partially in Rishus HaYachid, he is chayev if the content of the kli is outside. So apparently Rava in this case holds that we don't focus on the kli, rather we focus on the content of the kli. So this is a straight contradiction to those previous opinions, because earlier we just said that according to Abaye holds that we focus on the content. Here Abaye tells us that if he carries out a kli partially, he is pater because we focus on the kli. Rava says just the opposite. Here Rava says that if he carries out this kli partially, he's chai, we focus on the content. And earlier Rava says we're meant to focus on the kli itself. So that's more eifich. Let's switch things around. We're meant to reverse things. And indeed, we'll change the latest machlekes here in accordance with the previous version, so that they are aligned with each other. Continues the Gemara. Okay, biyad chayev. So Abaye told us that if he's standing in Rishus HaYachid and he carries out something using his hand, extending his hand in Rishus Rabim, he's chayev because we view the yad as an independent entity, and therefore he did a malach of eitzah by landing in placing in Rishus Rabim. Says the Gemara. But haven't we learned way back on Daf Beis Amud Aleph in Masechus Shabbos? Pashat Baal Abaye says Yad L'chutz. If the Abaye is standing inside, the homeowner extends his hand outside Rishus Rabim, and the poor man standing outside Rishus Rabim took something off the Baal Abaye's hand. Or alternatively, the ani placed something into the extended, outstretched hand of the Baal Abayes, and the Baal Abayes then was machnis that chayfetz in Rishus HaYachid. Shneim beturn, they're both pater. Apparently, the fact that his hand is extended, outstretched in Rishus Rabim is not regarded as being Rishus Rabim. Therefore, if the ani, for instance, puts something into his hand, and the Abayis takes that item back in Rishus HaYachid, he didn't do any malacha because he didn't do akira from Rishus Rabim. And likewise, in the case where he takes an item and carries out Rishus Rabim, extends his hand in Rishus Rabim, since he's standing in Rishus HaYachid, we don't regard that item as coming to rest in Rishus Rabim. So this is a direct contradiction to Abaye, who tells us that if one stands in Rishus HaYachid and extends his hand in Rishus Rabim, we don't follow his guf, we follow his hand. His hand is treated as an independent entity, and we look at the chayfetz as though it rested in Rishus Rabim. Says the Gemara, Hasam lamala megimel. The Mishnah there is speaking in a case where his hand is hovering over 3 tfachim, lamala megimel, higher than 3 tfachim of the Rishus Rabim. It's suspended mid-air. In that case, certainly there's no hanacha taking place. Hacha, however, in this case, where Abaye tells us that if one carries out something in his hand, so he's standing inside but he merely extends his hand outward, he is chayiv. Hacha lamata megimel, we're speaking about that his hand is within 3 tfachim of the ground. And therefore we apply the concept of love. Anything within 3 tfachim is considered to be closed up and connected. It's as though he placed the item down on Rishus Rabim and he is chayiv. So in summary, we had 2 discussions, one regarding eged kli and one regarding eged yad. Eged kli means if the kli is partially inside and partially outside. According to Rav Yochanan, we follow the kli. And Rav as well concurs with that shita. According to Chizkiah, we focus on the content. So as long as the content is outside, that is sufficient. According to Abaye as well, we focus on the content. What about in a case where he's standing in one rishus and extending his hand into a different rishus? According to Rava, we say, well, eged yad shmei eged, the fact that his hand is connected to his body, which is found in Rishus HaYachid. His hand as well is treated as though it is Rishus HaYachid. According to Abaye, we separate his hand, we view his hand as an independent entity, and therefore when extending his hand in Shusarabim, if it is within 3 tfachim of the ground, he committed the Malach of Eitzah regardless of the fact that his body is still in Shusayachid. Continues the Mishnah. Ha'moitzi, if one should carry out in any manner, ben b'yamina, whether using his right hand, ben b'smoila, or whether in his left hand, b'soichekoi, in his bosom, or yal kseifav, or on his shoulders, chayav, shekein masa b'nei kas. So all these are considered to be the usual manner of carrying b'yamina in his right hand, in his left hand. All these things are considered to be derech haitzah, and on his shoulder as well. Why is he chayav? By carrying something on his shoulder, shekein masa b'nei kas, because this was the manner of the b'nei kas, the Leviim in the Mishkan, in the Midbar, who would carry the Klei HaMikdash in this manner on their shoulders. What about Klei HaYada if he does it backhandedly, in an unusual manner? B'ragloi, for instance, using his foot, b'fiv, in his mouth, b'marpekoi, under his armpit, b'aznai, in his ear, b'sarai, in his hair, b'fandasai, upi alamata, he places something in his belt. For instance, Rashi says a hollow belt, for instance, a money belt, with its mouth facing downward. That's not the ordinary derech of Eitzah. It's going to fall out. So this is considered to be unusual. Bein podasei l'chalukoi, if he places something between the belt and his cloak, ub'sfas chalukoi, he places something in the hem of his cloak. Bemin olay in his shoe, b'sandol in his sandal, pater. He did something unusual. This is not the customary manner in which one carries something, and therefore he's pater. Amar b'lezer, ha'moitzi masui l'mala masar tfachim chayav. If one carries an item, Shusarabim, higher than 10 tfachim, so he lifts an item off the ground, and there is a gap between the bottom of the item and the earth of Shusarabim and the ground, a distance of 10 tfachim between his chayav. Now, although we know that Shusarabim, the public domain, only extends up until 10 tfachim, in this case, we regard it as a Malach of Eitzah. Why? The item is above 10 tfachim. Shekein masa b'nei kas, because we find a similar concept in the Midbar, where the b'nei kas, the Levim, would carry above 10 tfachim, and therefore we know that Shabbos is learned from the Midbar, from the Melechas HaMishkan, and therefore he is chayav. Says the Gemara, how do we know that took place there? Masa b'nei kas, menolan, how do we know that that's the way they carried their load? The Chsiv, because it says ala mishkan v'al mizbe'ach saviv. So these are the sheets surrounding the Mishkan. It is meant to provide a protection ala mishkan v'al mizbe'ach saviv. The pasuk connects Mishkan and Mizbe'ach. Makish mizbe'ach Mishkan. We're meant to connect the two and derive one from the other. Ma Mishkan Yud Amas, just as we know that the Mishkan was 10 Amas high, Ab Mizbe'ach Yud Amas. Likewise, the Mizbe'ach was 10 Amas high. Mishkan Gufim Minolan. How do we know that the Mishkan itself was 10 Amas high? The Chsiv, Eser Amas Orach HaKerish. So the Kerish, the beam, was 10 Amas long. So we know the Mishkan was 10 Amas high. We know the Mizbe'ach, which the Levim would carry bodily, was also 10 Amas tall. Now, how tall was a Levi? Uksiv Vayifres es Oila Mishkan. He spread the covering on the Mishkan. Who was it? Bamarav Moshe Rabbeinu Persei. It was Moshe Rabbeinu who did that. Now, apparently, from the fact that he was able to conveniently spread the spreading on this Mishkan, which was 10 amas tall, apparently he himself was also 10 amas tall. And we imply from there, we make a presumption. Mikana Talamed Goivin Shel Levim. How tall were the other Levim as well? Eser amas. So they were all 10 amas tall. 10 amas equals 60 tfachim, because each amas is 6 tfachim. So a Levi was 10 amas tall, 60 tfachim tall. Now let's assume that his shoulder height was 50 tfachim. Okay? Now let's apply a tradition. Ugmir, we have a tradition. The kol tuna de midli b'moites, any load, the midli b'moites, which is carried using poles, it is carried in this custom, in this manner. Tilsim el, a third of the load is above shoulder level. Uchay tilsim tachas, and 2/3 of this load is carried below shoulder level. Now let's make a calculation. Ishtakach. If so, we can conclude that the mizbe'ach was lifted very significantly off the ground. It was 10 tefachim off the ground. Why? Because the Levi, his shoulder height was 50 tefachim off the ground. Now the mizbe'ach, which was 10 amas, which is 60 tefachim, we just said that a third of it was going to be carried above shoulder height. So a third of 60 is 20 tefachim. 20 tefachim above the 50 tefach mark, and the remainder below the 50 tefach mark. What is the remainder of the mizbe'ach? 2/3 of the mizbe'ach is 40 tefachim. So 40 tefachim are going to be hanging below shoulder level. Shoulder level is 50 tefachim. So if 40 tefachim are below shoulder level, that leaves us an additional 10 tefachim between the mizbe'ach and the ground. Apparently, the mizbe'ach was carried in this manner. It was hoisted off the ground. It was suspended 10 tefachim off the ground. And this indeed is the source of our halacha mentioned earlier. If one carries a chayfetz in his hand, even above 10 tefachim, he is chayiv, because this is similar to the manner in which they carried the mizbe'ach in the midbar. Says the Gemara, perhaps we have another approach, as Rashi explains, because perhaps not necessarily were the Levim as tall as Moshe Rabbeinu. Perhaps they were a bit shorter, and thus the mizbe'ach was not really hoisted that much off the ground. So we have another raya mi aron from the way they carried the aron. Damar Mar, we learned aron tisha. How tall was the aron? It was 9 tefachim high, mekaberes tefach, and its covering was a tefach. Harikan asar. So the aron is 10 tefachim high. Ugmiri, we have this tradition, this formula, to call tuna, any load, the middle b'moites, which is carried using poles, tilsim el, will end up being a third above shoulder level, which way tilsim el and 2/3 below shoulder level. So one carries something with his hands using poles. It's generally, we have this formula that it was always done in this way, a third above shoulder level and 2/3 below shoulder level. Now let's make a calculation. Where was the aron situated? Ishtakach, we're going to conclude the lamalam yudavakoy, that the aron was above 10 tefachim off the ground. Why? Because let's assume that the Levi was of average height. Rashi says his shoulders were 18 tefachim off the ground. Now, if you carry this aron using the poles with a third of the aron's height, the aron's height is 10, so a third of it is 3 1/3, and that is above shoulder level. 2/3 of the aron, which is 6.6, let's say, which is below shoulder level is 18. Now, if the aron, which is 10, and only 6.6 of it is below shoulder level, that leaves us with plenty of space between the aron and the ground below. It's above 10 tefachim, and this indeed is a source that they would carry the aron 10 tefachim off the ground, and therefore, if one carries something in this manner on Shabbos, he's chayiv. Says the Gemara, "V'ligmar Moshe." Why don't we learn from Moshe? Meaning, why don't we make that presumption that all the Levim were 10 amas high, and being arrived from the mizbe'ach, as mentioned earlier, as the Gemara, perhaps Dilma Moshe, Shani Moshe was different. Damar Mar, because we learned that in Ashchina Shira, the Shechina only rests Ella al Chacham, a wise man, Gibor, strong, the Usher, wealthy, Balkoima, and tall. Shita Mekbetza says this is in order to make a good impression, in order that his words are properly heeded to. Therefore, this is unique to Moshe, and not necessarily is applicable to everybody else. Continues the Gemara, Amarav, Meshur B'chia, Hamaitzi Matzui, B'Shabbos al Roshai, if one carries a load on his head, on Shabbos Chayav Chatas, is considered to be Haitzah. Shekain, Anshe Hutzal, Oisenkain, because the population of this place called Hutzal carry loads in this manner. Says the Gemara, how do they determine what's called norm and what's not? Anshe Hutzal, Rubid Alma, are they considered to be, are they most of the world population? How can they determine what is normative, what isn't? Eli Itmar, Hachi Itmar. This is our mental in the halacha. Amar Av, Meshur B'chia, Echad Mipnei Hutzal. So we're speaking about a specific person who lives in this place called Hutzal. If he carries a load in this manner on his head, he's chayiv. Shekain b'nei iroi oisenkain, because the people in the city carry loads in this manner. It's considered to be normative for the people in this location. Says the Gemara, their das, their customs, their manner of doing things should be negated and nullified in view of the general consensus of the general population of the world. It's not considered to be derech haitzah. Ella says more rather, itmar. If we learn the halacha hachi itmar, this is the proper version. Ha'moitzi masi al roishay pater. Anybody who carries load on his head is pater. If you're going to argue and say, well, anshi hutzal oisenkain, in hutzal they do that. But Adam, their das becomes nullified, negated in view of the consensus. It is not considered to be derech haitzah, and even for them, it's considered to be shleik derech, not the usual manner of carrying something, and therefore they're patur. So in summary, We learned our Mishnah. If one carries out a object in a usual manner, in his hand, the right, left hand, in his bosom, is chayev, is considered to be the derech. Even on his shoulder is chayev. We learned that from the Levim in the Midbar who would carry things on their shoulders. They would carry the Klei Mishkan on their shoulders. What about if somebody carries something shlei kederech, not in the usual manner? He is pater. The Gemara told us if one holds an object in his hand and lifts it above 10 tefachim off the ground and carries it in that manner, he's chayev. We have two sources, either from the mizbe'ach or, as the Gemara concluded, better we learn from the Orain, which serves as a source of this halacha. If one carries an item on his head, he's pater. Even the Anshe Hutzel are pater because batla daton etzel koladim. Continues the Mishnah. If one had intended on carrying out an item hanging in front of him, then it shifted locations and it transferred to behind him, pater, he's pater. Why? Let's take a look at Rashi inside. Rashi up on the first line, says Rashi Kikoin, for instance. He tied up money in his bundle, so that it hang before him, and it shifted and it went behind him. Pater, because his intention, his plan, did not come into fruition. It's as though he was involved in doing something else, involved in doing one thing, and something else comes about that is not considered to be miskaven, and therefore he's pater. So once again, says the Mishnah, is shifted from before him to behind him. Pater, he's pater. What about in the reverse? He intended on having hang behind him and then shifted. It came before him. In this case, he's chayev. The Gemara will explain the reason for this. Continues the Mishnah. Be'emes amru, this is an accepted halacha. Ha'isha chageres b'sinar, a woman who wraps herself with a sinar, this apron, on which she ties some items. Now in this case, regardless of the location, bein milfaneh or bein ma'achreh, whether the item is hanging in front of her or behind her, it's irrelevant what her intention was. It's irrelevant where the item exactly is located. Chayeves, she's chayev. Why? Shekein roy li is chayzer, because it is customary, it is usual for the item hanging on her sinar to shift locations back and forth, and she knew initially that is what's going to take place, and therefore is considered to be a kiyum of her machshav, and she's chayev. Rabbi Daimer, the same halacha applies. Af become piskin, applies to the letter carriers. As Sessions explains, they would tie the letters and to their belts, and it also would jump back and forth, shift locations, and therefore, regardless of where exactly it is, the person is chayev, because that is the usual manner of these letters. To shift from one side to the other is considered to be niskaima machshavta. Continues the Gemara. Maishna, what is the difference between the first case and the second case? Maishna lefon of ubala la'achar the pater. Why in the case where it began in front of him and shifted behind him is pater? Because his machshava was not fulfilled. In the next case as well, la'achrav, if it began behind him, ubala lefonav, and then shifted before him, nami, in this case as well, his machshava, his plan, he intended on having it hang behind him. Then when it shifted before him, his machshava was not fulfilled. Says the indeed, this is a contradiction. The Tana who taught us the first halacha did not agree with the second halacha. The author of the first halacha is not the same author. Not the same author of the second halacha. Meaning, according to Belezer, there's a machlekes tanaim here. The Tanakama will hold, the one that authored the first halacha in the Mishnah will hold, that any shift of location, regardless of whether it's front to back or back to front, he will be pater on. Going to the next Tana, who's the author of the second halacha, he will hold that a shift of location is irrelevant, regardless of whether it's front to back or back to front, he will be chayiv. Amar Rava, my kushya. Let's analyze your question. What was your kasha on the Mishnah? Dilma, perhaps, there's a big difference between case number 1 and case number 2. Dilma lafan of ubala la'achrav, in the case where it began in front and ended up behind him, the pater. This is the reason why he's exempt. He had intended on having this thing hang before him in full view so that he could properly safeguard it. The niskaven l'shmira me'ula, he intended on providing a shmira me'ula, a heightened level of safeguarding. V'osu b'yadai, what ended up happening? Shmira pechusa. He only ended up, it ended up resulting in giving him only a lesser level of safeguarding. It's hanging behind him. That's not what he intended on doing, therefore he's potter. However, in the other case, when it began behind him and transferred before him, this is the reason why he's certainly chayiv. He had intended on providing a lower level of safeguarding, merely hanging it behind him, out of his full view. But it resulted in a much more heightened sense of level of shmir, of safeguarding. It's sitting before him. Certainly in this case, it's considered to be a fulfillment of his intention, of his kavanah, and he's chayiv. So your kasha to begin with can be answered very simply. There's a big difference between one case and the other. Ella my kusha. Rather, what then is the kasha on the Mishnah? The yukad of Masisa kasha. The inference, the diak, the implication of the words of the Mishnah will be difficult. Why? The Mishnah begins by saying, if he hung something in front of him and it slipped behind him, he's pater. We have a diak, an implication, an inference from here. However, in the case where he hung it behind him, and it remained behind him, chayiv. Certainly in this case he's chayiv. So although it's not really in such a secure location, it's behind him, nevertheless he's chayiv, because it didn't change locations. He put it there and it remained there. So this is a diuk from the first part of the Mishnah. Now let's proceed. Ema seifa. Let's proceed to the next part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, when is he going to be chayiv? La'achrav, if he places it behind him, u'baloi lefanav, hu chayiv. In the case where he places it behind him and it slipped before him, then he's chayiv. Apparently, la'achrav u'baloi la'achrav pater. If he should place it behind him and it would remain there, he would be pater, because it's not really in a secure location. It's not considered to be derech haitzah. Therefore he's pater. So you have a stira from the first part of the Mishnah, which seems to imply that a case where he places it behind him and it has it remain there, he will be chayiv. Whereas in the seif of the Mishnah, we have an implication, a diuk, which teaches us that only in a case where he places it behind him and it moves in front of him, it shifts lefanav. But in the case where it remained behind him, he would be patur, because otherwise, why does the Mishnah teach us a greater chiddush? That not only in the case where it shifts before him, even in the case where it remained behind him, he's chayiv. The Mishnah should have told us that halacha, rather than the halacha of the halacha of la'achrav abal lefanav. So apparently the fact that the Mishnah ignores this halacha, the Mishnah doesn't mention that if it should remain behind him, if he would have placed it behind him and remained behind him, he would be chayiv. Apparently the seif of the Mishnah holds he would be patur in that case. Amar Elazar, Tavra, indeed this is a contradiction. Mishashanazu, the Tana, which teaches us the first part of the Mishnah, which implies that when he places something behind him and it hasn't remained there, he would be chayiv, is in disagreement with the second portion of the Mishnah. Mishashanazu, the Tana of the first portion of the Mishnah, Loi Shanazu. He is not the same Tana who teaches us the second portion of the Mishnah, who holds that in this case he would be patur. Amar Rav Ashi, my kushya. What was your kasha to begin with? There's no contradiction at all. Dilma lemi kamar. The seif of the Mishnah, which does not mention this case, it's because it's needless. It's needless to say. It's not a novelty. Lemi kamar. The Mishnah means to say as follows: there's no need to speak about this case. Certainly in that case where he places it behind him and it remained there, certainly he's chayiv, because his intention was fulfilled. Ella afilu la'achrav abal lefanav itzrichle. The Mishnah needs to teach us the case where he placed it behind him and it shifted, it came lefanav. There is a chiddush. That's a novelty. Why? Perhaps I would say, since his intention was not fulfilled, he placed it behind him and it shifted locations that came before him. He wouldn't be chayiv kamash. The Mishnah teaches us that's not the case, because here he placed it behind him, which was a less than secure location. In the case where he had intended on placing the item in a location where the security was of a lower level, and it ended up providing a greater shmira, certainly this case is chayiv. Therefore, the Mishnah tells us that even in the case where the location has changed, it began behind him and is transferred to before him, he'd be chayiv, even though there was a change of locations, a transfer. Nevertheless, that is considered to be a kiyum of his machshava because the security was improved by having the item shift before him. But certainly, says Rav Ashi, all agree that if he had tied the item behind him and it remained in that location, of course he's chayiv. The reason why the Mishnah didn't touch that case, didn't discuss that case, that's pashut, that's not a novelty. Certainly he's chayiv, why not? He put it there and it remained there. Continues the Gemara. This case of having something placed behind him and having it remain there, whether or not he's chayiv is tanoi, is actually a machlokes tanoim. Because there's a svara to say that if somebody placed something behind him in an insecure location, perhaps that's not considered a derech haitzah and he's potter. Let's see. The Sanis we learned in the following bais. Hamoitzi mois v'pundasai. If one carries out money in his money belt, upil lamala, with its mouth facing upward, it's secure, it's proper. Chayav, he's chayav. Piyol lamata. What if the mouth is facing downward? Rabbi Yehuda machayev, v'chachamim poitim. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda began a debate. Iyata moedim. Do you not agree? But if a person hangs something behind him and it remains there, he's chayav, even though it's an insecure location. Here as well, in this money pouch, with its mouth overturned, even though it's not really so secure, he should be chayav. V'amalei, they responded, V'iyata moedim. Do you not agree? If a person carries out in an unusual manner, using the back of his hand, using his foot, he's potter. Here as well, this overturned money belt is considered to be shaloi kederech, and therefore he's potter. I presented one argument, and they responded in kind. I couldn't find a proper response to their argument. And they couldn't find a proper response to my argument. Okay, continues the Gemara. Let's analyze these words. The fact that Yehuda tells the Chachamim, do you not agree that in the case where it began la'achrav and remained la'achrav, do you not agree that it's chayiv? Apparently, lav mechlal, the Rabbanan patri, the patri Rabbanan. Apparently the Chachamim disagree. It's only Rabbi Yehuda maintains that la'achrav, ubal la'achrav is chayiv. Apparently the Rabbanan disagree. So machlokes tanai. Says the Gemara of the Tamech. Now according to your version, according to your approach, the Ka'amrele, the fact that they respond to him, do you not agree that if he carries something using the back of his hand, using his foot, he's potter? Michlal de mechayev. Is there a diak from here that apparently Rabbi Yehuda holds that he's chayev? You can't say that. Michlal de mechayev Rabbi Yehuda. Vatanya, haven't we learned? La'achar yada v'ragla divakol potter. All agree that if he uses the back of his hand, uses his foot, he's potter. So apparently, the fact that the Rabbanan challenged him using this halacha, there's no implication from there that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that. Ella rather, says the Gemara, la'achrav ubal la'achrav de'akol chayav. All agree that he's chayav in the case where he places something behind him and it remains there. La'achar yada v'ragloi de'akol potter. If he does it backhandedly or uses his foot, all agree that he's potter. So there's no difference of opinion regarding the cases mentioned by Yehuda and the Chachamim. Ki pligi, when then is a disagreement? In this specific case, where the pouch, the money belt is overturned, its mouth is facing downward. The question is, what are we going to equate this to? Mar Rabbi Yehuda medamile la'achav v'la'achav. Rabbi Yehuda equates this to the case of a person hanging something behind him in an insecure location and it remained there. Certainly he's chayav. Rabbi Yehuda says likewise in our case of the overturned money belt, he's chayav even though it's not really secure a location. He's chayav. Umar medamile. However, the Chachamim compare the case of the overturned money belt la'achar yada v'ragla, like the case of la'achar yada v'ragla, where it's not considered to be derech haitzah. Here as well, the money is going to fall out. It's not the usual manner for carrying money. And therefore, he is potter. Rabbi Yehuda, however, holds that just like placing something behind him, which is insecure from thieves, nevertheless, he is considered to be derech haitzah and is chayiv. Here as well, in this overturned pouch, it's considered to be derech haitzah and is chayiv. Continues the Gemara. Be'emes amru isha tana. We learned in the Brayso called be'emes halachi. Whenever we have the term emes, it's considered to be undisputed halach. Rabbi Yehuda af makalei piskin. So Rabbi Yehuda says that the letter carriers They are chayiv regardless of the location of this letter, since it's meant to shift locations. Tana, we looked at the Brayso Shekain Laveler in Malchus. The letter writers of the king Eisen Kain were carrying this manner, so it shifts back and forth, and it's irrelevant where it's to be found, since it is the derech of this letter to shift from one location to the other is considered to be the derech of the Yitzhak and the kiyum of his machshava. So in conclusion, we learned that if a person hangs something lefanav and bala la'acharav, it slipped behind him, he's pater. There are two exceptions with the isha who ties something to her apron and the letter writers of the king. What about if he ties something behind him and it slipped before him? Certainly in this case it's chayev. What about the case where he tied it behind him and it remained there? The Gemara concludes that all agree it's chayev. There's machlekes in the case where a person puts something in his money belt with its mouth facing downward. Rita says it's chayev, although it's insecure. He says it's chayev, just like the case of a person tying something behind him. The Chum say he's pater. It's considered to be like kalachayadav v'raglei shloi kederach, and he's pater. Continues the Mishnah, Hamoitzi kikil shisarabim. If an individual on his own carries out a loaf of bread into shisarabim, chayev. What about Haitziyu Shnayim? If two people join together, Reuven and Shimon both carry out a single loaf into shisarabim, Peturin, they are pater. Why? Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi here is 28 lines from the bottom, beginning with the word masnisin. Says Rashi, Haitziyu Shnayim Peturin. As we learn from the pasuk ba'asoisa, yachid v'leishnayim. The pasuk teaches us there's only a chiyuv when an individual on his own will perform the malacha. But if two people join forces and do the malacha together, they are pater. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah continues, Lo yachal echad lo yitziyai. What about if we have a case where the Reuven on his own is not capable of carrying this loaf, it's too big, it's too heavy. V'yitziyu shnayim. And two people join forces together to carry it out. Chayav, in this case, certainly they're chayiv. Reb Shimon Paiter, even in this case, he holds they are pater. Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav. V'amar some say Amar Abaye. V'amar some say Masnisa Tana. We learned in the Brayso. We have a three-way machlokes. The first case is Ze Yachal, V'Ze Yachal. What about if Reuven and Shimon are both fully capable of doing this malach, of carrying out this item, but they opt to join forces to do it together? Rav Meir Mechayev, Rav Meir says, even in this case, they're chayev. As Rashi says, he doesn't use the word of ba'asoisa, the drush of ba'asoisa for this purpose, and therefore he holds, even if two people join together to the malacha, they are chayev. Continues the Brayso. Rab Yehuda, Rab Shimon Paiter, they hold that these people are pater since they joined together unnecessarily. Each one on his own was fully capable of doing this malacha. They joined together, and therefore they're pater. What about in the next case? Ze eliyachal, v'ze eliyachal. So both individuals are not capable of doing the malacha independently. Reuven and Shimon both can carry out this heavy item in Shusarabim, and they joined forces and did the malacha together. In this case, we have a shift. Rabbi Yehuda, Rab Meir Mechayim. So not only is Rab Meir Mechayev, Rabbi Yehuda also agrees that he's chayev, that they're both chayev. Why? Because it's considered to be urchei de derech. If it's too large, too heavy for one person, then two people certainly are meant to do it together. And therefore, he holds that they are chayiv. Reb Shimon Paiter, even in this case, Reb Shimon says they are pater. So up until this point in the Gemara, we have two cases where Reb Shimon says pater all the way, Reb Meir says chayiv all the way. Reb says it depends. If these two individuals are capable of doing it on their own, then if they join forces, they're pater. If they're incapable of doing it on their own, they join forces, they're chayiv. A third case, Ze Yachal. So if Reuven is fully capable, Ze Yachal, and Shimon is not capable, the chayiv all agree, then this case is chayiv. It's referring to the person that's capable. We disregard the other person. Tanya Nami Yachi. We find this in the Brayso as well. Hamoitzi kiklish surabim chayiv. If one carries out a loaf on his own, is chayiv. Haitziyu Shnayim. If two people do it, Rab Meir chayiv. Because Rab Meir holds two people do a malacha together, they're chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda, it depends. If one person on his own was incapable of doing it, and he needed his friend to help him, so both together joined forces. Each one on his own was incapable. They joined forces and together they did it. Chayav, and then they're chayiv. But otherwise, patur. Rab Shimon says in all cases, they are pater. So in summary, if we have a case of zeh yachal v'zeh yachal, each one on his own is fully capable, according to Reb Meir, they're chayiv. Reb Meir holds all cases are chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says in this case, they are pater. Reb Shimon as well says pater. What about if they're both incapable? Zeh yachal v'zeh yachal, and they need each other. Once again, Reb Meir says chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda agrees in this case that they are chayiv. Reb Shimon holds even in this case, they are pater. What about if Reuven is capable? Zeh yachal v'zeh yachal, Shimon is incapable. Reb Meir once again says chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda says chayiv. And Reb Shimon says chayiv. The Gemara later will explain that it is actually the one that is capable. It is Reuven who is the yachal, who will be liable. We disregard the second individual who is incapable and doesn't really play a role in this melachas haitzah. He's merely assisting, he's helping, and as the Gemara later will explain, is not reckoned. And only the one who is fully capable is chayiv. Okay, time for a brief chazara, a brief review of today's daf. We began with the discussion of a kli which is partially in Rishus Harabim and partially in Rishus HaYachid, or a person who has his hand extended in Rishus Harabim and he's standing in Rishus HaYachid. Do we say that we regard the kli which is partially inside, or the hand which is connected to a person who is inside, as though it is also considered to be inside, or not? We have a machlokes, Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan regarding the kli, Abaye v'Rava regarding the kli and also regarding the hand. We proceeded with the Mishnah, which discussed various forms of eitzah. There is the standard manner of carrying, b'minoi, b'smoili, b'cheikoi, where is chayev. That's considered to be gederach. Even on one's shoulder is chayev. In accordance with the Masa B'nei Kahas, we derive from the Levim who would carry the Klei HaMishkan in that manner in the midbar. What if he does it shloi kederach? He carries something in an unusual manner. He's pater. The Gemara told us even if one carries an item in his hand above 10 tefachim off Rishus Harabim, he's chayiv. The Gemara concluded, we learned either from the mizbe'ach or better yet from the aron, which was lifted 10 tefachim off the ground. If one carries a load on his head, he's pater. Even the Anshi Utzal, who are accustomed to doing so, are pater because batla daten, says Kol Adam, their mind, their das, their manner of doing things is nullified, is negated in view of the general consensus of the general population. Is not considered to derech haitzah. The Mishnah told us that if he carries something lefanav and it slipped behind him, he's pater. There are two exceptions according to Tanakama. We have the case of the Isha who is chaygeres b'sinar. In that case, even if it slips behind her, she's pater, she's chayav. We have Rabbi Yehuda who adds the case of the letter carriers. What about if he hung it behind him and it came before him? Certainly it's chayav. If he hung it behind him and remained there, he's also chayav. What if somebody carries money in an overturned money belt? According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's chayav, even though it's not really so secure. He's still chayav. According to the Chachamim, it's considered shloi kederach, and he's pater. And finally, we have a three-way machlokes regarding joining forces when it comes to doing a malacha. We have three cases. Zeh yachal v'zeh yachal. If Reuven and Shimon are both independently capable of doing this malacha and they decide to join forces, according to Reb Meir, they're chayiv. According to Reb Yehuda, they're pater. According to Reb Shimon, pater as well. What if we have zeh eino yachal v'zeh eino yachal? Reuven and Shimon are both incapable of doing it independently and they decide to join forces to accomplish the malacha. According to Reb Meir, they're chayiv. According to Reb Yehuda, they're chayiv as well. According to Reb Shimon, even in this case, they're pater. And finally, zeh yachal, if Reuven is fully capable of doing the malacha independently, v'zeh eino yachal, and Shimon joins him, but he's incapable of doing it on his own, according to Reb Meir, Reuven is chayiv. According to Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon as well, Reuven will be chayiv, and Shimon will be pater.